It began as a love story that everyone in the small town of Fairview, Illinois admired, a story of redemption, second chances, and devotion. But behind that picture-perfect image, something poisonous was brewing. Evelyn Brooks had always been a woman people found hard to read. At 42, she carried herself with effortless grace, the kind of woman who could charm a stranger in minutes and win over anyone with her polished smile. Yet beneath that composed exterior lay a long, troubled history of deceit. Before she met her husband, Evelyn's life had been marked by broken relationships, petty theft, and a reputation for manipulation that followed her wherever she went. Then came Daniel Brooks, a 45-year-old construction manager known for his integrity and quiet kindness. Daniel had worked his way up from nothing, spending decades earning the respect of his co-workers and neighbors. He met Evelyn at a local charity event, where she volunteered to rebuild her image after a string of past mistakes. To Daniel, she seemed like a woman who had turned her life around, someone who needed understanding, not judgment. Friends remembered how quickly he fell for her. Within months, Daniel introduced Evelyn to his family, and despite their reservations, he stood by her fiercely. "People can change," he would tell his sister, Laura. "She just needs someone who believes in her." They married in the spring of 2017. At the ceremony, Evelyn looked radiant in a cream lace dress, her smile wide, her hand resting gently in Daniel's. To outsiders, it seemed like she had finally found peace. Daniel was happy, truly happy, and everyone hoped Evelyn's troubled past was behind her. But as the years went on, that perfect image began to crack. Daniel continued to work long hours, providing Evelyn with comfort and stability. He bought her a modest but beautiful house on the edge of town, took her on weekend trips, and encouraged her to pursue her passion for interior design. Yet Evelyn grew restless. She had never been content with ordinary things, she craved attention, admiration, and control. Behind closed doors, her mood would shift from warmth to cold disdain. She often complained about the monotony of her life and the burden of marriage. When Daniel brushed off her comments, she began speaking more openly about her fantasies, a life without him, a life of freedom and money. Daniel laughed it off at first, thinking she was joking. But those remarks soon became darker. Then came the first hospital trip. It was late autumn when Daniel suddenly fell ill. He had always been healthy, but one evening, he began vomiting violently, struggling to breathe. Evelyn called for an ambulance, her voice trembling as she told paramedics her husband was allergic to a medication he had accidentally taken. Daniel survived, but barely. Doctors confirmed that he had ingested a drug he was severely allergic to, one that had no reason to be in his system. Evelyn told everyone it was an accident. She cried at his bedside, gripping his hand, whispering that she couldn't live without him. Daniel, weak and disoriented, believed her. He defended her when friends questioned the strange circumstances. But Laura, his sister, wasn't convinced. She had seen the way Evelyn looked at Daniel lately, not with love, but with something colder, calculated. Weeks later, when Daniel finally returned home, Evelyn seemed unusually cheerful. She encouraged him to rest, take it easy, and let her handle everything, his meals, his medications, his finances. Daniel trusted her completely. Then, one quiet evening in early spring, Evelyn called 911 again. Her voice was shaking as she reported that her husband had taken his own life. She claimed he had been depressed, overwhelmed by work. When police arrived, they found Daniel lying lifeless in their bedroom. A farewell message glowed on his phone, and beside him, a neatly typed note, his supposed goodbye. To everyone, it looked like a tragedy. But to those who knew Daniel, something didn't feel right. In the days following Daniel's death, the small town of Fairview was draped in quiet disbelief. Friends, neighbors, and co-workers gathered at his funeral, unable to comprehend how such a steady, kind-hearted man could have chosen to end his life. The church was filled to capacity, a reflection of how deeply Daniel was loved. Evelyn sat in the front pew, dressed in black from head to toe, a delicate lace veil covering her tear-streaked face. Her sobs echoed softly through the chapel, but to some, they felt rehearsed. She clutched Daniel's wedding ring in her gloved hand, whispering that she couldn't imagine life without him. Most people accepted the story at face value. The note found on Daniel's nightstand, typed neatly and signed with his name, spoke of exhaustion and hopelessness. It read like the confession of a man pushed beyond his limits. The text message sent to Evelyn that same night, reading, "I'm sorry. I just can't keep living like this," seemed to confirm the tragedy. But Laura Brooks, Daniel's sister, couldn't rest. She had known her brother better than anyone, his routines, his sense of humor, his unshakable optimism. He wasn't the kind of man to give up, she told detectives again and again. He would never do this. At first, her concerns were politely brushed aside. Detective Harris, the local investigator assigned to the case, found no signs of forced entry, no obvious struggle. The toxicology report listed an overdose of a prescription sedative as the cause of death, one that matched a medication found in the house. Everything pointed to a closed case. But Laura refused to stop asking questions. She noticed small inconsistencies. The letter's wording didn't sound like Daniel's. He never typed, he wrote everything by hand. His text messages were short, often filled with shorthand and emojis, not full sentences. And most importantly, the drug in his system was one Daniel had always avoided because of a severe allergic reaction. He'd nearly died from it once. When Laura brought these details up to Evelyn, her sister-in-law's demeanor shifted. The grieving widow's soft tone turned defensive. "You're looking for someone to blame," Evelyn snapped. "Daniel was miserable, Laura. You didn't see how unhappy he was." Laura didn't argue, but inside, her suspicions grew. She began quietly gathering what she could, old text messages, medical records, anything that might prove Daniel's death wasn't what it seemed. Meanwhile, Evelyn's behavior started to draw attention from others, too. Barely 2 weeks after the funeral, she was seen dining at an upscale restaurant, laughing over wine with a man from town. She later claimed it was just a friend, but people whispered. Her morning seemed oddly brief. She also began the process of filing an insurance claim, one worth over $500,000. Daniel had named her as his sole beneficiary, trusting her completely when he made the policy years earlier. The payout would change her life. Still, Evelyn played the role of the grieving widow flawlessly when anyone came around. Her home was immaculate, the curtains drawn, framed photographs of Daniel displayed lovingly on every surface. But when the door was closed, the mask slipped. Detectives later learned she had started searching online for expensive properties and high-end jewelry just days after Daniel's death. On one of her credit cards, investigators found a transaction dated only a week before the incident, a purchase at a local pharmacy for the very medication that had killed Daniel. The receipt showed it had been bought under a false name. That discovery changed everything. Laura's persistence paid off when she shared her concerns with a friend who worked in the county clerk's office. He quietly passed her information to a state investigator who had dealt with fraudulent insurance cases before. Soon, Daniel's death was no longer seen as a tragic suicide, but as a potential murder. As whispers spread through Fairview, Evelyn remained calm. She told everyone she had nothing to hide, even welcoming officers back into her home for further questioning. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of irritation, even contempt, when she thought no one was watching. Behind her charm and careful words, cracks were beginning to show. And as investigators dug deeper, what they found would expose a pattern far darker than anyone had imagined. Detective Harris had seen his share of difficult cases, but something about Evelyn Brooks didn't sit right with him. On paper, Daniel's death looked like a suicide. Yet the inconsistencies Laura pointed out gnawed at him. Why would a man who loved his life, his work, and his family suddenly choose to end it, and do so with a drug he knew could kill him instantly? The more Harris examined the details, the stranger things became. For one, the farewell text Evelyn claimed Daniel sent her couldn't be traced back to his phone at the time she received it. Cell tower data showed the message had been sent while his phone was connected to their home Wi-Fi, after his estimated time of death. The realization hit hard: someone else had sent that message. When confronted with the finding, Evelyn looked momentarily startled before recovering with a perfectly measured breath. "You think I sent it?" she said with an incredulous laugh. "That's ridiculous. Daniel and I shared devices sometimes. Maybe that's why the data looks strange." Her answer was smooth, almost rehearsed. But Harris could see the flicker of unease behind her eyes. He decided to dig deeper into Evelyn's past, and what he uncovered painted a troubling picture. Before marrying Daniel, she had lived in 3 different states under various last names. In each place, she left behind a trail of unpaid debts, fraudulent credit accounts, and reports of stolen valuables from people she had once called friends or partners. None of it had ever led to formal charges, but the pattern was unmistakable: wherever Evelyn went, trouble followed. Meanwhile, Laura continued her own search for truth. She spent hours going through Daniel's old emails and receipts, hoping for something, anything, that could expose Evelyn's lies. One evening, as she flipped through a binder of bank statements, something caught her eye: multiple withdrawals in the weeks before his death, each just under the reporting limit. Thousands of dollars had disappeared from Daniel's account, all in cash. It didn't make sense. Daniel had never been secretive with money, and he despised waste. When she confronted Evelyn about it, the widow shrugged casually. "He was probably planning something," she said, pouring herself another glass of wine. "Maybe a surprise for me." Daniel could be thoughtful like that. Laura didn't buy it. The investigation soon took a decisive turn when Harris obtained a warrant to examine the couple's shared computer. Forensic analysts uncovered several deleted files, including drafts of a letter eerily similar to the suicide note. Each version was slightly different, as if someone had been practicing. The typing style didn't match Daniel's previous documents, but it matched Evelyn's perfectly. That was the first concrete link. Harris brought her in for questioning again. This time, the tone was different, less friendly, more precise. "Mrs. Brooks," he began, "can you explain why your husband's alleged suicide note has your typing pattern? The same word spacing, the same use of dashes?" Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came for a moment. Then she smiled faintly. "I typed what he dictated," she said softly. "He was too emotional to do it himself. He wanted to get his thoughts out before she paused, letting the silence fill the room. "Before he went through with it." It was an audacious lie, one she delivered with chilling composure. Harris leaned back in his chair. "And yet you didn't mention that before." "Why?" Evelyn's tone hardened. "Because I didn't want to tarnish his memory." "Isn't that what you're doing now, detective? Dragging a dead man's name through the mud?" It was a performance, but a good one. Even seasoned officers in the room felt the weight of her words. For now, Harris had to let her go, but he knew he was dealing with someone who believed she could talk her way out of anything. That evening, as Evelyn left the station, Laura was waiting outside. Their eyes met across the parking lot. "You think you fooled everyone," Laura said quietly, "but the truth has a way of coming out." Evelyn tilted her head, her smile razor-thin. "Careful, Laura. Grief can make people say dangerous things." For the first time, Laura saw it, the coldness behind Evelyn's charm, the emptiness that had always been there. By now, the community was starting to whisper. Daniel's suicide didn't add up. Rumors spread through Fairview like wildfire, about the insurance money, about Evelyn's suspicious behavior, about her shopping sprees and sudden confidence. But behind the gossip, real evidence was forming, evidence that would soon expose not just one lie, but a series of crimes stretching back years. Evelyn Brooks had built her life on deception. And now, piece by piece, it was beginning to collapse. By late summer, the quiet town of Fairview was buzzing with rumors. The woman once seen as a picture of grace and sorrow had become the center of scandal. Evelyn Brooks no longer looked like a grieving widow, she looked like a woman running out of control. Detective Harris and his team pressed forward, determined to unravel the truth. Every layer of Evelyn's life revealed another lie. They learned that she had taken out 3 separate life insurance policies in Daniel's name, 2 of them without his knowledge. Each was signed electronically using forged consent forms and tied to fake email addresses that traced back to an IP in their own home. In total, the payout exceeded $1 million. It was a chilling realization: Daniel's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a financial plan. But there was more. Harris discovered that the medication responsible for Daniel's allergic reaction had been purchased twice, once before his hospitalization, and again weeks before his death. Both purchases were made under aliases. When detectives traced the second order, they found a security camera image of a woman wearing a blonde wig and oversized sunglasses. Though the disguise was clumsy, her posture and features were unmistakable. It was Evelyn. When confronted with the evidence, Evelyn didn't flinch. "That's not me," she said flatly. "You can't even see the person's face." Harris leaned forward. "No, but we can see the car parked right behind her, your car, Mrs. Brooks. Same license plate, same dent on the bumper." Her expression didn't change, but a small twitch in her jaw betrayed her. Evelyn's carefully crafted world was starting to fall apart. Laura Brooks, meanwhile, had become the unofficial face of persistence. She spoke to anyone who would listen: reporters, lawyers, even state officials. Her relentless push forced the Fairview Police Department to reclassify Daniel's case as a suspicious death investigation. For Laura, it wasn't about vengeance, it was about justice for the brother who had always protected her. As the investigation expanded, another disturbing discovery surfaced: Evelyn had been staging anonymous threats against herself. Weeks after Daniel's death, she filed multiple police reports claiming someone was harassing her, leaving notes on her porch, sending menacing messages, and vandalizing her property. She even accused her own teenage son, Michael, from a previous relationship, of being behind it. "He's been unstable for years," she told police tearfully. "He blames me for everything." But when investigators checked the timestamps and digital trails of those messages, they realized they all originated from Evelyn's own laptop. Every single one. The revelation horrified even seasoned detectives. Not only had she allegedly killed her husband, she had tried to manipulate sympathy by framing her own child. When Harris confronted her with the findings, Evelyn's mask finally slipped. "You think you know me?" she hissed, her calm demeanor cracking for the first time. "You have no idea what I've been through. Daniel wasn't some saint. You don't know what it's like to be trapped in a marriage that suffocates you." Her voice was sharp, trembling with fury. For a brief second, her charm vanished, replaced by something raw and dangerous. The detective held her gaze. "That's not what this looks like, Evelyn. It looks like you planned this, every detail. You wanted him gone." She stared back, her eyes cold and lifeless. "Maybe I just wanted to be free," she whispered. That line would haunt Harris for years. When the evidence was finally compiled, the picture was clear: Evelyn Brooks had meticulously plotted her husband's death. She had poisoned him with a drug she knew could trigger a deadly reaction, staged the scene to look like a suicide, fabricated messages to mislead investigators, and even faked threats to portray herself as a victim. Her arrest came early one morning in September. Police arrived at her home just as the sun began to rise. Evelyn opened the door wearing a silk robe, her expression eerily calm. "Mrs. Brooks," Harris said, reading the charges, "you are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Brooks, insurance fraud, and filing false reports." She didn't resist. She simply smiled, as if she had been expecting it all along. Finally, she murmured, "Someone's paying attention." As officers led her away in handcuffs, neighbors gathered outside, whispering in disbelief. The woman who once walked proudly through their quiet streets now looked small, but still unbroken. Inside her home, detectives would later find neatly organized folders of financial documents, fake IDs, and a detailed notebook outlining her future plans that included moving to another state once the insurance money came through. It was a chilling testament to how deliberate her actions had been. But for Laura, the arrest brought only partial relief. The trial was still to come, and Evelyn Brooks was far from finished playing her games. The trial of Evelyn Brooks began nearly 2 years after Daniel's death, but by the time the courtroom doors opened, the case had already captured national attention. The headlines painted her as a modern-day femme fatale, the widow of Fairview, the poison bride, the woman who killed for freedom. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Evelyn was led inside in a navy blazer and pearls, her expression serene, almost regal. It was as if she were attending a business meeting, not facing charges of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. Her posture was flawless, her smile controlled, the same charm that had fooled everyone for years. Inside, the air was heavy with tension. Every seat was filled, reporters, townspeople, and Daniel's family sat shoulder to shoulder. At the front, Laura Brooks clutched a tissue in her hand, her eyes locked on the woman who had destroyed her brother's life. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Mark Devereux, laid out a meticulous case. He began by describing Daniel Brooks not as a broken man, but as a devoted husband and hardworking soul who believed in redemption, someone who had given Evelyn everything. And for his kindness, Devereux said, turning toward the jury, he was rewarded with betrayal, manipulation, and death. Piece by piece, the prosecution presented its evidence. The fake insurance policies, the forged signatures, the pharmacy purchases made under aliases, and the drafts of the suicide letter all painted a damning picture. Forensic analysts explained how the farewell text had been sent from Evelyn's own phone, timed to appear as though it came from Daniel's. The most haunting testimony came from the forensic toxicologist, who revealed that the drug in Daniel's system, the one that had killed him, was the exact same compound Evelyn had purchased weeks earlier using a fake ID. "There is no scenario in which this was accidental," he said plainly. Each revelation chipped away at the facade Evelyn had so carefully built. But she never lost her composure. She took notes calmly, occasionally glancing toward the jury with faint, sympathetic smiles. When it was time for the defense, her attorney, Richard Harlan, took a very different approach. He painted Evelyn as a misunderstood woman trapped in a toxic marriage. He claimed Daniel had been emotionally distant, controlling, and occasionally cruel. She did not kill her husband, Harlan declared. She found him, broken, hopeless, and beyond help. He suggested that the inconsistencies in her story were due to trauma and confusion, not deceit. To bolster their case, the defense called a psychiatrist who testified that Evelyn displayed symptoms of dissociative behavior and post-traumatic stress, supposedly stemming from years of emotional neglect. Then came Evelyn's own testimony, the moment everyone had been waiting for. When she took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. She looked directly at the jurors, her voice trembling just enough to seem sincere. "Daniel was kind," she began softly, "but kindness can become control. He didn't trust me, not really. He kept things from me. He made me feel invisible." She paused, wiping a tear. "That night, he told me he couldn't do it anymore. He said he felt like a failure. I thought he meant our marriage. I didn't realize he meant his life." Her words were carefully chosen, her tone heartbreakingly fragile. For a moment, some jurors seemed moved, until the prosecution rose for cross-examination. "Mrs. Brooks," Devereux said, pacing slowly, "if Daniel intended to take his own life, why were there 3 insurance policies, all with your name, all filed within months of his death?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. "He wanted to make sure I was taken care of." Devereux raised an eyebrow. Did he also want to make sure his alleged suicide note was typed on your computer, with your writing style? Did he want to send his last message from your phone, after he was already dead? Evelyn hesitated, just long enough for the silence to feel like a confession. Her mask cracked for the briefest moment before she whispered, "You're twisting everything." The prosecution then unveiled their final exhibit, Evelyn's notebook. Inside were pages of neatly written plans detailing how she would use the insurance money, when she would move out of state, and a checklist labeled, "After it's done." The first item on that list, "Call 911, sound panicked." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. From that point on, the defense had little ground left to stand on. When closing arguments arrived, Devereux's voice carried the weight of every piece of evidence and every ounce of Daniel's lost trust. She deceived him, poisoned him, and staged his death, not out of madness, but out of greed. Evelyn Brooks didn't want freedom. She wanted fortune. And she believed she was clever enough to get away with it. The jury retired in heavy silence. Evelyn sat motionless, her fingers laced tightly in front of her, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first time, she looked small, not powerful, not poised, but cornered. After 7 hours of deliberation, the verdict was read. Guilty on all counts. Evelyn didn't cry. She didn't speak. She only exhaled slowly, as though the performance was finally over. Laura Brooks closed her eyes, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Justice had come, but so had the realization that nothing could bring her brother back. Evelyn Brooks was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As she was led away, her final words were barely audible, a whisper that sent a chill through the room. "I told him I'd be free someday." When the verdict was announced, a quiet wave swept through the courtroom, not of triumph, but of exhaustion. After 2 years of relentless headlines, speculation, and courtroom tension, the case of Evelyn Brooks was finally over. Yet for those who had lived through it, peace remained out of reach. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall, a soft, steady drizzle that blurred the flashes of reporters' cameras as Evelyn was escorted to a waiting transport van. Her face, once radiant and poised, was pale and expressionless. She didn't look toward the crowd, nor did she react when someone shouted, "Monster," from across the street. Laura Brooks stood under a black umbrella, watching her sister-in-law disappear into the van. Her hands trembled, but not from the cold. The weight of everything, the lies, the courtroom battles, the long nights spent chasing truth, had left her hollow. She had wanted justice, and she had gotten it. But it felt strangely empty. "I thought it would feel like victory," she whispered to her friend beside her. "It doesn't. It just feels over." For Laura, the years that followed were slow and quiet. She sold her brother's house, the place that had once been filled with laughter and warmth but now felt haunted by absence. She moved into a small apartment across town, returning to her work at the library. On some mornings, she would drive past Daniel's old construction sites, watching the buildings rise, reminders of the man who built things meant to last. But what Daniel had built, his trust, his home, his marriage, had been destroyed by someone who had never loved him at all. Detective Harris also struggled to leave the case behind. In his 2 decades of police work, he had seen cruelty, greed, and betrayal, but something about Evelyn lingered. Her composure, her precision, the way she seemed to enjoy being one step ahead until the very end, it all haunted him. Months after the trial, he received a letter from the state correctional facility. It was from Evelyn. The note was brief, typed on prison-issued paper. "Detective Harris. You were right about everything, except one thing. I didn't kill Daniel for money. I killed him because I wanted to feel what power really was. Thank you for helping me find it. E.B." Harris folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer, where it stayed unread again for years. He never told Laura about it. Some truths, he decided, served no purpose once justice was done. In Fairview, the story of Evelyn Brooks became a cautionary tale, whispered over coffee counters and in church pews. Parents told their daughters to be careful who they trusted, and neighbors locked their doors a little tighter. People no longer mentioned Evelyn by name, they simply said, "the widow." The house where Daniel died was eventually sold, renovated, and painted a new color. A young family moved in, unaware, at first, of its history. But locals still crossed the street when they walked past at night, glancing toward the window that once framed a perfect picture of love and lies. For Laura, healing came slowly. She started volunteering at a shelter for victims of domestic fraud and emotional abuse, helping others untangle themselves from the kind of manipulation her brother had never seen coming. It gave her purpose, a way to turn pain into something useful. On the 3rd anniversary of Daniel's death, she visited his grave for the first time in months. The cemetery was quiet, the sky heavy with clouds. She placed a single white rose against his headstone and knelt, her voice soft but steady. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I told you I'd make them see the truth. You can rest now." As she stood to leave, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves across the graves. For a moment, she imagined she could hear his voice, calm, kind, the way it had always been. It wasn't forgiveness she sought anymore. It was peace. And somewhere, far from Fairview, behind concrete walls and razor wire, Evelyn Brooks began her life sentence. To other inmates, she was quiet and withdrawn. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. But those who worked at the prison noticed something unsettling about her, the way she smiled at small things, the way she still carried herself with the confidence of someone in control. One guard once asked her during morning rounds if she regretted what she'd done. Evelyn looked up from her book, her eyes calm and clear. "Regret?" she said softly. "No. Regret is for people who lose. I survived." Her words would echo in that hallway long after she walked away. Years passed, but the story of Evelyn and Daniel Brooks never truly left Fairview. It lingered like a ghost, not the kind that rattled windows or whispered through walls, but one that haunted the mind. A reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with violence or chaos. Sometimes, it smiles, wears perfume, and says "I love you." The once peaceful town, with its tidy lawns and friendly greetings, had been changed forever. For a while, people avoided the Brooks name altogether. The house where Daniel died sat empty for months, its windows dark and uninviting. It was eventually bought by a couple from out of town, unaware of its history. But to longtime residents, it would always be the Brooks house. Laura Brooks became something of a quiet figure of strength in the community. People admired her, not for vengeance, but for persistence. She often spoke at local schools and community events, warning about the subtle power of manipulation. "Monsters don't always look like monsters," she told one audience softly. "They can wear wedding rings and promise you forever." She never remarried, never sought the spotlight. Her peace came from helping others, women who'd been deceived, families torn apart by greed, survivors of psychological abuse. Through her, Daniel's memory lived on as more than just a victim's name in a tragic case. He became a symbol of kindness betrayed, but not forgotten. Detective Harris retired 2 years after the case closed. He'd solved dozens of crimes in his career, but none had stayed with him like Evelyn's. Sometimes, when he passed by the courthouse steps, he could still see her, poised, smiling faintly, walking into the courtroom as if she were the one in control. He never opened her letter again, though it remained locked in his desk drawer until the day he packed it away for good. When asked during his final interview what case had defined him most, he didn't hesitate. "The Brooks case," he said quietly. "It taught me that evil doesn't shout, it whispers." As for Evelyn, her life inside the state penitentiary followed a strange pattern. In the beginning, she was quiet, polite, and reserved. But over time, her charisma began to draw people in, even behind bars. She convinced a few inmates to write letters on her behalf, claiming she was wrongfully convicted. A small group of online supporters even formed, insisting she had been framed, though they knew only the side of her she wanted them to see. Every few years, her story resurfaced in documentaries and podcasts. The titles varied: The Widow's Deception, The Poisoned Promise, A Marriage Built on Lies. Each time, Evelyn's image appeared on the screen, poised, elegant, unbroken. When prison reporters asked if she had any words for Daniel's family, she gave the same serene answer every time. "I hope they find peace. I already have." But peace was never hers to have. Inside, the years began to weigh on her. The charm faded. The mirror no longer reflected the woman she once pretended to be, the one who fooled everyone. The walls of the prison closed in, and for the first time, Evelyn was forced to face silence she couldn't control. No more schemes, no more admirers, only the echo of her own choices. One winter evening, nearly 10 years after her conviction, a guard passing by her cell found her sitting by the window, staring at the snowfall beyond the bars. "You thinking about home?" the guard asked. Evelyn smiled faintly. "No," she said. "Just wondering what it feels like to be missed." She turned back toward the window, her reflection blending with the gray sky, a woman who had finally become what she had always been, alone. Back in Fairview, life slowly moved on. The town rebuilt its sense of safety, though the scars remained invisible beneath the surface. The story of Daniel and Evelyn Brooks became a tale parents told their children, not to frighten them, but to remind them of something important: that truth can hide behind the prettiest lies, and love without honesty is just another form of danger. Every spring, Laura visited Daniel's grave. She never stayed long, just enough to place fresh flowers and speak a few quiet words. "I still think of you when the wind changes," she'd say. "And I still make sure people remember who you really were." Then she'd smile softly, the way Daniel used to, and walk away as the breeze carried petals across the grass. Fairview might forget the details one day, the dates, the courtroom scenes, the news headlines, but the lesson of the Brooks case would remain. Because beneath all the tragedy, it wasn't just a story about a murder. It was about trust given freely, love twisted into a weapon, and one man's kindness meeting the sharp edge of another's deceit. And in the end, when the last echoes of Evelyn Brooks faded from the prison walls and from the town that once whispered her name, the truth endured, simple, tragic, and eternal. That evil can wear a smile. And that justice, though slow, never truly sleeps.